Hey, everybody, real quick, we had some recording issues on this one, so if after a while the sound changes slightly, that's why. Also, if you want to see the videos that they're referring to in this episode from, I guess, 15 years or so ago, go to YouTube and search The Social Web TV.
Welcome, everybody, to the Techmeme Ride Home Experience for April 28th, 2022. We have a very special, very large cast of characters today joining us to talk about the revenge of Web 2.0 social. We've got a lot of people today who I have known for a very long time, who have been around in the industry, and we've sort of gone our separate ways for a couple of years. And with everything going on, of course, Elon, ostensibly buying Twitter, we thought it'd be worthwhile to bring in perhaps the old school perspective on, where this stuff has been and what things we've tried in the past and what lessons and learnings we've got from those worlds. And just, in some ways for a bunch of us to reconnect and say hello and see where we're at with things. So to begin, why don't we actually just go around, say your name and I don't know, what did Kaveen say, like where you were before? Anyways, say your name and perhaps, where you were, I want to say in the 2007, 2008 period, just to kind of like give some sense of that. And then we'll go from there. So actually I'll start. So I'm Chris Messina, and back in the day, I was on my own. I was independent. I worked on a project called DISO, the Distributed Social Networking Project, and eventually ended up at Google, where I worked in developer experience and as a developer advocate. Joseph, you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, everybody. I'm Joseph Smar. I was the chief technology officer of a startup called Plaxo back then, and we were trying to open up the social web so people could stay connected in terms of their contact info. I then also went to Google and helped start Google Plus, among other things. And a decade later, I finally made it back into the startup land where I'm CTO of Triller.
Right on. John.
Hey, this is John McRae, and I was a partner in crime with Joseph Smar back in the day at Plaxo, where we were a bit of a Switzerland amidst all these different walled gardens, and we're trying to figure out how to use technology and PR and early podcasting to try and make a dent in the world to get to that open, interoperable world. And I am delighted that Joseph and I, who parted ways a long time ago when he went off to Google, we always said we'd work together again someday, even if not in the same company, but somehow managed to help rope him into where I'm at with him, Triller, which we could talk more about later if relevant, but super excited to get this band back together, like in the old days of the social web TV.
Oh, shit, he did it. All right, we'll give you guys context for that in a minute. Kaveen.
Hey, Scott Kaveen here. I think back in 2008, I was rocking a really horrible goatee. And knew Chris through got to know Chris through the Spread Firefox campaign and Drupal days. From there, when sort of the open web stuff we were doing, I was the CEO of Jan Rain and on the board of the OpenID Foundation and the OAuth Foundation, and then went on to do Urban Airship, short stints in cannabis, which I was happy to get out of with an exit, and then now doing Web3 stuff with Jump.co.
I feel like you maybe needed to do the cannabis after Web 2.0. But anyways, DeWitt.
Hey, everyone.
Hello.
How's it going?
Yeah.
It's really good to see some old friends and familiar faces again. So for those who don't know me, and I hate to conflate my identity with my job, but I've at this point been there so long that they're probably somewhat synonymous. I'm with Google, and these days I do privacy-preserving machine learning, which is a fascinating field inside research. And I like to think that, we're on the good side here. But back in those days, maybe it was the same thing. I was on the good side, even inside a big company. And, we tried to, back then, use the power and leverage that Google had to maybe have some influence. But I think the biggest influences came, in conjunction with everybody here and the stuff that we were doing on the outside. So fun to see people again.
Yeah, totally. Dick.
Hi, I'm Dick Hart, and about that time, 2000, 2008, I was running my company Skip Identity that I had
SXIP for anybody who wants to Google that.
SXIP, yeah. Still own Skip almost everything something.
Nice.
And so I funded that myself after selling Active State, which was my successful venture in the earlier days of the web around open source and porting Perl over to Windows, and lots of excitement around the open source area. And then I got interested in identity. And Skip didn't survive the 2008 crash. But at that time, I was on the board with Scott, and we helped create the OpenID Foundation. We convinced all these big companies to deploy OpenID and make it happen. After that, I went to Microsoft for a while and started what became OAuth 2 and JSON Web Tokens. Hung out in SF for a while, trying to do a few startups, and then got pulled back up to Seattle, where I spent a couple years at AWS doing identity and Alexa doing identity, and left there. And I'm now doing Hello, a cooperative to build a missing internet identity layer.
I love that. You're still on that beat. It's just like the proverbial thing. It's like Dennis and Foursquare and Dodgeball and the rest. Anyways, Rabble, say hello.
Hey, I'm Rabble. I was at Odeo building the podcast platform and stayed there through the pivot to launch Twitter. And then I made the dubious decision to go over to Yahoo and join Katarina Fake and the folks over at Yahoo Brickhouse with the idea that Yahoo would provide more resources than Twitter in terms of being able to build Web 2.0 stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That did not work. Did a bunch of projects, did a stint at the MIT Media Lab, the Center for Civic Media, to understand what we were doing. And now I'm building a decentralized social media protocol and app called planetary.social, and have been working with the Twitter Blue Sky project.
Amazing.
So it all just goes back to the same thing.
I feel like so many of us have been working on or around a lot of the same problems, from a technical, solution space, from a societal solution space, from just user experience, design, marketing, all the rest. So, okay, amazing. Thank you guys so much for those introductions. I actually wanted to start with Joseph and John talking a little bit more about the socialweb.tv. And the reason why I think that's important is because, fortunately, we have the recordings. Originally, they were uploaded to a Gary Vaynerchuk sponsor. I'm not going to make an analogy to his current enthusiasm for NFTs, but anyways, he was very excited about a video sharing platform called Viddler, and the socialweb.tv was uploaded there, not YouTube, to share around. And Viddler no longer exists, and so the archives were lost for some time. And then a couple years ago, we actually found them, and they were re-uploaded. So they are on YouTube now. You can find the socialweb.tv and all the conversations that we had back then. But I wanted John and Joseph actually just to start there and kind of frame that moment. Why was it that we needed essentially kind of a web TV show about what was happening in the space? What were we thinking we were doing? Why did we think it was important? And what kind of, brought you guys together? And why did you think it was, had a potential future?
Sure. Maybe I'll kick it off. My role at the time, I was the CMO of Plaxo, and Joseph was the CTO. And Joseph, who was then and is still now an extremely excitable person, was getting really passionate about OpenID, OAuth, interoperability, data portability. And it seemed to me that was A, the right stuff to be worried about and thinking about and excited about, and B, also a smart way to put Plaxo in the conversation, and essentially to position Plaxo as an open alternative to the walled garden vision of the future that Facebook and others were presenting. And, there was this community that so many of the folks who've come up on stage were a part of then, a vibrant community. And it was so cool to get folks together to essentially nerd out on these topics on video. It wasn't even really a podcast, but it was a episodic video thing that we managed to shoot sometimes at F8, sometimes at Google, and get major companies to come on and talk about what they were doing to open up. So that's kind of my view on it, but Joseph, would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I think it was the confluence of two factors. So on the one hand, you had this bottoms up.
That was a joke, right?
That we could build.
Sorry.
That we could build the standards, the technical standards to enable digital identity and open social networking. And, it came out of a lot of places, but the Internet Identity Workshop, that was the sort of biannual get together of a bunch of people, was a big place where a lot of these standards were developed. And we just finished one this week, in fact, and I hadn't been there for 10 years since I moved away from doing Google Plus, and now back at Controller, it's relevant again. But it's amazing that there's still that same energy of solving all these problems, and you see some of that in Web3 as well, right? Just kind of working through the building blocks and the solutions and making the demos, and it really does give you that feeling of possibility. And at the same time, it was hard to remember back then, but the social networks weren't that big. Twitter was still pretty small. Facebook wasn't that big. And it wasn't yet clear how the whole space was going to play out. And so we were having success with at the time, the big internet giants of, Microsoft and Yahoo and AOL and Google and so forth playing along. And there was definitely interest, if ambivalence, from the social networks. But it did seem like maybe there was an opportunity to turn the tide of history by, just being both evangelical enough and substantive enough and connected enough to get people involved and having them think this is the good thing to do, and ultimately to get enough demand from end users to support the kind of interoperability that would ultimately be necessary. And it's pretty clear we were off to a good start, but then the walled gardens realized they could just kind of hold out and win, and they did. And it's only now, I feel like, that we're starting to get to this new phase where the chapter has played out and there's sort of discontent with the current incumbents. And people are now once again asking, isn't there a better alternative? And I think that's what sort of brought us all back together again.
Amazing. Brian, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, can I take back just real quick, and then I'm going to let y'all flow because y'all were there and I wasn't. But just to contextualize a bit, one of the things that people have to understand about identity and the internet is that at the very, very beginning, your identity was everything. You couldn't, before it was commercialized, you couldn't get on the internet unless you got on from your school or from your work or whatever. So you couldn't get an email address unless it was assigned to you. And then, sort of the training wheels period of the internet era were things like, CompuServe's IDs were literally strings of numbers. And then you had your AOL ID and things like that. So the period of time that you guys are going to be talking about is there's this window where the original people going on the internet, your identity followed you around because that was the only way you could get on the internet. And so where today it's just you flip a switch and you're there and you can go wherever. There was a period of time where it was completely walled gardened in the AOL sense. And then a few years later, it got walled gardened again by, the Yahoos and the especially the Facebooks and even Twitters and things like that. But I think what you guys are going to talk about is there's this period of time where before it walled gardens. Well, it
was like the web. Yeah.
Right. It was just wait, there's a vision where you can be sort of this person going around the internet free, on your own sail, under your own power, and
it was like blogs,
right? Exactly. Yeah. And so I'm not putting words in anyone's mouth, but from the era of you only can get on the internet if it's assigned to you and your ID is assigned to you, to the AOL era where again your ID is assigned to now where it's your Facebook ID or your Twitter ID and things like that. There's this brief window of time where there was a vision of maybe we can all be on the internet under our own steam and sailing our own boats. And so, sorry, I just wanted to contextualize that.
It's so important because I think what I've noticed is the way in which many things, but internet culture in particular tends to pendulate from kind of one extreme to another. So like you're describing, there was an era with AOL and Prodigy and they were like kind of internet telcos where you kind of had to like get service from them, and through them, they would provision you an account. And that account was how you connected to other people and found other users. And the web was this kind of creeping thing that came along that blew all that up, decentralized everything, and gave people, essentially removed the gatekeepers and allowed anybody to be able to publish, their own outpost on the web and then to connect peer-to-peer to any other service that existed. I see that Brad Fitzpatrick is in the audience. And he, as the author of OpenID, kind of came out of the Zanga world, as far as I recall, with early blogging platform and LiveJournal and 6apart. And the idea was that you could actually have your own website, go to someone else's blog, leave a comment, and essentially authenticate that you came from the other website. And so that peer-to-peer decentralized social web was the cornerstone of what we were trying to build. And through a number of, challenges from a user experience perspective, from a security perspective, from a market dynamics perspective, that idea of actually having your outpost, out on the wild web of the West, turned out to be a little bit too much for too many people. I do want to bring up Rabble to talk a little bit about the tension that existed back then between some of the ne'er-do-wells of the Plaxo era that were trying to shake things up and decentralize things, and also some of their reputation for maybe doing things that were a little dubious. Rabble?
Yeah, I mean, I made the point in our back chat that, at the time, I perceived Plaxos as being kind of a privacy problem. Like they were hoovering up all the email contacts and address books and everything else. And
to be clear, I want to make a point or add to your point, which is that back in the early days, especially the early days of the iPhone, there were no permissions that you had to grant to gain access to your address book. So these things were just available to any app developer whose app was installed on your phone. And they could just grab your contacts and instantly, magically, some might say, could find your friends.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And so I remember thinking that Plaxo was this privacy problem, but it was attempting to build it in an open way, and now what it got replaced with is a much worse privacy problem. In many ways, people perceive the companies that came out of Web 2.0 as big, Facebook and Twitter and a bunch of others, as the results of Web 2.0, when in some ways they were the sort of, they're what came after this attempt to build everything as open protocols and as an open network. And it's not clear to me why the open project failed. I actually don't know, because it was dominant and there were lots of people working on it and lots of energy around it. It didn't have much money, but it did have a lot of momentum.
It failed because of ThinkD. At ThinkD.
At ThinkD, of course, if you are a Twitter user, is Mark Zuckerberg.
Can I chime in there for a second?
A little bit? Where'd you go, Scott?
John was going to cover that one.
Sorry. I was just going to quickly say the ThinkD thing. I sent around that screen grab where I accidentally outed Mark Zuckerberg on Twitter, and his first comment was love watching the social web TV. Small world.
So good. How did you find his account, by the way? Because it was actually a big deal to figure out that Mark Zuckerberg was on the competitor social network.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I assume the context was that they were considering acquiring Twitter.
Yeah.
And this is 2009, and the inner circle who was exploring it were not as native to the platform as, and so they were chatting back and forth, and I followed Dave Morin, and suddenly, like, I saw interactivity, and then I followed Mark, and he was freaked out. Like, he thought he was under the radar, and suddenly
his
his
response was so telling to just everything and how he's run that company since, in my opinion. But, yeah.
Say more. How has he?
I mean, just was like, hey, how'd you find this out? I mean, it's kind of public anyways, but how'd you tell me how you found it?
It's like, oh, you think you caught me red-handed, but actually,
not that there's a problem.
Yeah. Exactly.
It was so good. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
On a funny aside, last week Eb sent me a bunch of DMs claiming that he, in the early days, never actually intended to sell Twitter, and that all those meetings that they had with Google and Facebook and Yahoo were just because the investors pressured him to do it, and they never took any of the offers seriously. I don't know if that's rewriting history, but it's interesting.
Work uninterrupted, run your business with less stress, and get more leads from your marketing efforts with Smith AI. Smith AI provides businesses with award-winning virtual receptionists who handle your calls, chats, and texts to unlock new business at a fraction of the cost of hiring an in-house staff. Smith AI is not your average receptionist service. Since 2015, they've combined the best receptionists across North America with AI technology for superior business communications and customer engagement. Their friendly and professional agents can screen leads using your custom criteria, schedule appointments on your calendar, and call back leads who complete your forms. They can do it all by phone 7 days a week and also on your website through their 24/7 live chat service. They even answer texts and Facebook messages. Smith AI pays for itself and then some with all the new clients their receptionists help you win. Never miss another lead. Boost revenue, increase your focus at work, and keep your staffing costs down. It's as simple as forwarding your calls to Smith AI. Plans start at just $240 a month. Try Smith AI today. Our listeners will save $100 when you sign up using our promo code Techmeme at smith.ai. Visit smith.ai to read 5-star reviews, and be sure to use our code Techmeme, TECHMEME, to save $100 at sign up. Don't let another day go by. Try Smith AI. Have you ever had a difficult client, someone who won't stick to the scope of work or refuses to pay? Do you ever wish you could ask a business lawyer to help? Let me introduce you to Rocket Lawyer, the affordable solution to help you establish, grow, or safeguard your business and work confidently. And did I mention you can try Rocket Lawyer free for 7 days? As a Rocket Lawyer Premium member, you'll be able to make documents you need to run your business and deal with clients. Ask a lawyer your legal questions and get an answer fast from an attorney in Rocket Lawyer's trusted network. Sign all your contracts at home or on the go with Rocket Sign. Plus, Rocket Lawyer members are covered by document defense, which means if there's a dispute over a Rocket Lawyer document, an attorney will personally review your situation and help prepare a response on your behalf. More than 2 million small businesses and freelancers have trusted Rocket Lawyer, and you can too. Head to rocketlawyer.com/workconfidently to start your free trial today. That's rocketlawyer.com/workconfidently.
I mean, that is. And I guess to this broader point about the economics of it, look, I mean, certainly I can only speak for myself. I came out of the open source tradition, just like, with Kavitan, we were super excited about Firefox, about browsers, about web technologies, and about giving people a new platform to publish, again, without gatekeepers. And so the commercial angle was actually quite, boring to me, just because I had a broken relationship with money, but that's a different story. And yet there were a lot of people who clearly, saw dollar signs, whether it was because they saw that advertising was going to become a big deal, or because there was just a huge amount of activity and data, from this. But a lot of people actually didn't take the social web very seriously early on, but some folks did. And I guess, I want to bring DeWitt into this because one of the sort of key moments that I remember in sort of the annals of the Web 2 kind of like history and developing some of these standards. And actually, Dick, you probably have a perspective on this actually as the second version of this protocol. But some of us were working on OAuth, and I remember this one time, like it was, a bunch of like small startups, like it was Pounce and it was Twitter. And again, these were like really small, social web sites. And I made this joke to somebody who was working on it. about how I thought it'd be really funny if Google one day actually, used OAuth. Like, wouldn't that be so great? Ha ha ha. Like, why would they ever use something that we built? Because it was all NIH over there, not invented here. And DeWitt actually I remember he was so punk rock. He came out and he was like, hey, what would you say if Google adopted OAuth? And I was like, no way. And it was like one of those like great, crazy moments. So DeWitt, I don't know if you can bring us in. You're still there, so you're probably under 8,000 NDAs. But if you could bring us back to that moment and walk us through a little bit about what you saw, kind of in the social web and in adopting some of these standards and moving some of those things forward. What was the conversation inside the company at the time?
That's too much credit to me, and maybe even too much credit to Google. I think that, we were in a situation where we were shipping a lot of APIs, right? And identity was fundamental to a lot of those APIs.
This was the era of App Engine, which, again, if Brad can join us, I'm sure he's got stuff to say, but go ahead.
It was this moment in which, for the first time, I think we were exposing a lot of the technologies, via some surfaces that people could embed and do more with. And in that path was, how do you exchange authorization and authentication? But that was not the core of it. Like, that wasn't the interesting bit. So I think it was relatively easy for, even a big company to say, hey, we're okay working outside the company on those parts, because it wasn't a threat to the company at that point. But again, I don't want to oversell what Google contributed there, because I think, the bulk of the work actually happened outside during that moment. But also, that was not, the most critical.
But I mean, it was, one, hugely validating, that Google, of course, as you said, was, shipping all these APIs, would take seriously this format, this protocol, this technology that, came from outside the company. And in addition, would lead to something like the Open Web Foundation being created to essentially create a legal framework that was this kind of, we'll get into that in a minute, because I think the legal aspect of this is really misunderstood, or at least not appreciated, in terms of the hurdles that many companies had to go through in order to, one, use open technologies, and two, be able to contribute to those technologies in a way that wasn't either anti-competitive or problematic from a patent and IP perspective. I don't know. Dick, do you want to talk a little bit more about both your experience, because I'm sure Skip had a lot of patents and IP around this, and you worked at Microsoft. What is your take on how those things fit into the mix, and led to either the adoption or lack of adoption for some of these things?
Oh, wow. There was a lot in that question, Chris. Just on the patent thing, that's actually why I ended up leaving Microsoft, is I had a patent portfolio that I built up defensively, and Microsoft had looked at buying Skip and decided they would just hire me and pay me lots of money. But part of my employment contract was that if I knowingly let them infringe on any patents, I'd have to grant them a license, and I didn't want to give them to them free, right? You can't just, if you want them, pay for them. And so I think 4 weeks into my job, my manager asked me to write a white paper, and I said, well, that might infringe on some of my patents. He said, what do you mean it might infringe? I said, what do you mean? I said what my lawyers were supposed to say, so that I was knowingly doing that. And so I got banned working with my group. And but then I was allowed to work on open stuff, which was hilarious in some ways, that Microsoft was paying me. But the only things I could work on were things where there was no IP. So I could, go and work on what became OAuth 2 and JSON Web Token.
Maybe you can speak to some of the competitive, energies and nature of what was going on back then. Because, for me coming up, Microsoft was like my sworn nemesis. It was the evil empire. It was the thing that wanted to shut down the web and was averse in so many ways to openness. And it might be valuable to sort of parse out some of what open means and what effective openness means, because I would say both, Zuckerberg has followed the Microsoftian model with openness, to be the platform that all other applications and platforms live upon. And ironically, they're sort of in this place where they are, dependent upon other platforms, whether it's Apple or Google, et cetera. And so they kind of find themselves squeezed, which is, of course, why the metaverse is so important to them. But maybe you can take us back again to how interoperability and, formats and technologies, it felt like a very different kind of conversation back then in this world. And I feel like you've been in this, soup for so long. Maybe you can help us to like think about the difference between back then and now.
Well, a good thing to do would be to wind back a little bit further in time. I remember this time at Skip. Tim O'Reilly was an investor in my board. We had a board meeting in Vancouver, and he had a meeting following that down in Seattle with Jim Olchin, who was running Windows at the time, because there was this big hoopla. They were battling around open source. Microsoft hated open source.
Is that a Canadianism?
Probably.
Okay.
I might have just made it up as well.
Okay. But there was a hooperism.
But there was a big kerfuffle. And so Jim Olchin asked him if he could come by and chat. And I said, that I'd love to be a fly on the wall on that. And then Tim said he was going to be having dinner with this guy that has great wine. I was like, we'll say hi. And then he said that Neil Stephen was going for dinner. And I said, I'll drive you down. So then I became Tim's technical assistant in that meeting with Jim. And boy, that was an entertaining meeting of, Jim talking about industrial software, Jim Olchin talking about industrial software, and Tim O'Reilly talking about open source at the same time. So, as all of you know, Microsoft was very anti-open source. But by the time I got there, which was 2009, Microsoft was, embracing open source. I remember sitting in a partner meeting at Microsoft, and Steve Ballmer calls me out about how Microsoft was being open. So we just hired Dick Hart, he's a big leader in open source and identity and openness and everything, right? And so that was shifting inside the company by that point in time around how Microsoft was trying to do. They didn't really understand the internet or the web or things like that, but they were trying to realize that they needed to interop and work with other people to some degree. And, the reason we got involved in OAuth, we worked on OAuth was just, OAuth 1 was just too hard to implement for people.
Yeah.
And, so myself and Alan Tom from Yahoo, and I'm trying to remember who it was from Google. Do you remember who it was that I worked with at Google?
Was it Brian?
Yeah, I think it was Brian. And, so both Alan and Brian had been deep in security. They had well-worn paths of all the stupid things that could happen and all the mistakes that we made. And really what we did is what was Microsoft, what was the common pattern between the homegrown solutions that all the companies had and added a couple of other features. One of the key ones was sort of the refresh token and the idea of scopes. And, that was the basis for what eventually became OAuth 2. There was some other part to your question, though, Chris.
Well, no, actually, that's helpful, because one of the things that I think is germane about this conversation, and again, in this pendulation between kind of open and closed, and now we're in this kind of Web3 moment where, there are a lot of ideas that are kind of being reintroduced and reinvented and recreated, oftentimes, sometimes worse than what we were doing back then. I think it's worthwhile to understand a little bit about the history, at least as I remember, of OAuth 1.0 and 1.0a and what we were trying to solve for back then. And just to provide a little color, OAuth 1.0 was designed to work in WordPress blogs, which were often hosted in shared hosting environments, in which case they were kind of insecure. And so part of the OAuth 1.0 protocol with Aaron Hammer, who was the author and the kind of curator of that spec, was to essentially recreate or reinvent SSL, the secure socket layer that keeps most of the internet secure today. And we did that because of the nature of self-hosted WordPress. And the DSO project was trying to make it possible for individuals who are hosting their own blogs to be able to do a peer-to-peer connection and to create the peer-to-peer social web. And so what it turned out to be is that it was just far too hard to get, normal website operators to understand crypto. And so fast forward to OAuth 2, and it was like, well, let's just use SSL that already exists. It's already built in the browser, and adopt this new, format and token to make it much, much simpler. So I think that evolution is important. And, I'm not a developer, so I can't speak to some of the nuance in that, but I think it would be useful for you guys to talk a little bit about those tensions and about the trade-offs that we had to make to drive more adoption? Because I think, like OAuth has been a resounding success, I would say, as far as standards goes. Like everybody uses it. I mean, the fact that it is so much of a force today and it continues to be maintained and built into most APIs, I think, is a testament to the work that was done back then by a lot of you guys. So
yeah, it really
when you think about Web3, what can we take away from that?
It's important to remember, too, the other context that led to the thing that Web 2.0 is honestly best known for and that led to OAuth was people wanted to do mashups, right? They wanted to take information
yes,
and use it in another place. They wanted to create new experiences, especially now that for the first time they were actually creating data. Remember, the web used to just be a bunch of static web pages, but people started being able to actually upload information about themselves. And once they'd done that, they would say, I want to see my restaurant reviews on a Google map, or I want to see, they want to bring these things together. And without APIs, the only way they could do that was ask you for your username and password on that other service and then scrape the information out. And that's how all these
password anti-pattern. Yes.
Right. So people forget this, but Facebook grew by asking all their users for their Google username and password and then, importing their address book or methods like that. And that was just sort of that was the best you could do. And of course,
actually, Joseph, that is such an important point. And I think a lot of people, try to build new social networks today and they're like, I'll just build like a new social network and it'll be better, in some feature way. But actually, it was the way in which Facebook did hack to get your network, no matter where it was. And, Plaxo also...
I was going to say, wasn't that inspired by Plaxo, unless right. I'm remembering incorrectly?
Well, I mean, there's the Sean Parker kind of like, part of this.
Why Sean went to Facebook, because he sort of understood the bootstrapping problem.
Exactly.
The graph. But the point being, even back then, users trusted the sites where they were putting that information in because they wanted the ability to import their contacts and find their friends. But it's obviously a very insecure way of doing things. And so each company had sort of come up with their own bespoke way of working around that to the extent they offered APIs at all. And there was, so there was obviously the opportunity just to sort of say, let's have one implementation that everybody uses so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over again and it's easier to use. But I think the bigger opportunity was let's allow for interoperability and data portability so that we can have a lot more flourishing of innovation and try a lot more different ways of consuming that data and producing it and have some people want more filtering or less filtering. And I think that's the way that you really hear the echo in today with all of this hand wringing around the future of Twitter is it's not so much about decentralization as just that we've lost that capacity for really disruptive innovation because all the information is still trapped. And, Twitter, my God, it's 18 years old now or 17 years old, something like that, right? And
16.
Okay, yeah, right. Facebook's 18 or 2004. Yeah. But I mean, that's a long time in tech years, right? And the core services really have not changed that much because once they got those network effects in place, I mean, they sort of didn't need to. And you've seen new kinds of networks come up like TikTok and others, but it's not really replacing that core functionality. So I think to me, that's the through line in all of this was that people wanted interoperability so that there could be innovation. And these standards were in support of that. But, the industry users weren't demanding it enough. Regulation wasn't demanding it enough. And these, big incumbents realized they didn't have to, basically.
I do feel you're kind of an innovation maximalist. And the reason why I would frame it that way is because we've also seen a lot of other negative, externalities and things that, have been in a way sort of innovative. Like Cambridge Analytica was, you might say, innovative to an outcome that, of course, some of us may not have liked. So what is the balancing of that? And actually, I want to bring Rabel up here because I think, given that he's building a decentralized, platform, and I understand a little bit more about his politics, I think I would like to understand from Rabel, your perspective, how, I guess, suppressed innovation is making it harder for you to compete or find users or to grow or whatever it is that you want to say about this.
I mean, it's critical. The reason that all of these platforms say you can have your data, they let, everything from Tinder to Facebook lets you, request all of your data and download it, is because your own data isn't very valuable to them. It's all the metadata and connections, and that's the thing they lock up. And, initially there was space by which, you could get that social graph out of Facebook and Twitter and all these others. And Twitter didn't lock it down as much as others, but they they locked it down, and then they used the address book as a way of doing all sorts of data mining. And, that building a new platform that's decentralized, like that is our biggest problem. And, one of the things we've been working on
is the cold start problem. Is that what you mean?
Like how do you find the people? Like it's all locked down now. And like, it's maybe email addresses, but that's, or phone numbers, but that's it. And, we've been working on trying to say, okay, are there zero knowledge proof ways of creating a service where I can figure out, I'm an app developer. How do I tell one user of my app who else they know on the app without me needing a copy of that data and without people having to give up their privacy? And, you can do it. We just need to figure out a way to get people to adopt it. And then anybody could build a social app. And right now we have a few gatekeepers, and it's a real pain.
Yeah, how do I put my hand up?
I don't know. Rabble was able to figure that out. It's if you hit the heart, and then on the very far side there's a hand that looks like a stop hand. You see that?
What do I hit?
But the stop actually makes you go.
It does. Yeah, there's a little heart button in there. I don't know which app version you have, but if you want to raise your hand, you hit the heart, and then you got it. But before you jump in though, we actually have a special guest speaker who has shown up, Terrell Russell, who built a service, if I recall correctly, called Claim ID. And Claim ID was an amazing OpenID provider. It was the open identity provider that I used for a while. And, I would dare say that it might have been the very first link in bio type product before there were links in bios that you needed to link up to some of their service. I don't know. Terrell, are you able to come up and say hello?
Yeah, I'm here. Hey.
Welcome in.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, I think we might have been the first. I think along with some of the code that came from Scott's company from Jan Rain, we were able to stand up an OpenID provider. I think we might have been the first one to stand it up outside of one of the major companies.
Do you want to
ran that for a few years, and then worked out that we just it's a horse race, and we had two people, so that wasn't viable in the end. But yeah, that's what we did.
Just give us a little bit of introduction about yourself and how you actually came to the social web, because was it North Carolina?
Yeah, still in North Carolina. That's right.
Okay, right. So you, like a lot of us were in Silicon Valley. You were not. And so what I'm curious to hear from you, having built Claim ID, where did you come into this? Like, why did you think this was exciting? Why would you get involved with OpenID?
So we had an interesting question in our library school. It was Fred Stutzman and I just started thinking about identity in terms of from the academic side. How do you own this? How do you prove it? How do you, kind of keep it with you for life? If you want to do that, how do you hide from it? We had an interesting prompt from one of our professors at the time. He said, we'll just give you some passing grades if you can convince me I can't find you on Google. And it's an interesting challenge to try and make yourself disappear before there were services to try and, help people who want to pay for that.
Right.
So in terms of thinking about how that works, how it should work, how do we want it to work? There's definitely kind of an academic side to that question, but then the practicality of it became very interesting. We both, could program our way out of a paper bag. So maybe a wet paper bag. And so stood this thing up and started playing with it and met all these people, had some very interesting conversations about protocols that did not yet exist. And, basically just happened to be in the room at the time. So ran with it and then, watched the NASCAR problem happen where every site now has a button that goes on the login page. And, then watched like we were talking about a second ago, the large companies that had manpower and dollars, basically eat the problem because they wanted to own the core, right? Like if you log in and you're branded, you're using that brand on the web, that's the most powerful thing that they can do.
I mean, and you see it now with so many like Web3 efforts and, ENS and sign in with Ethereum. So a lot of these things are happening again. These conversations are happening again. And there's a desire, of course, to own, whether there's something called name tag. As I said, there's the Ethereum name service, which has some interesting sort of correlates with XRDS Simple, which was a discovery protocol that was built, I believe, on top of Yadis. Anyways, this is like, we're going to need an acronym jargon soup file for this. Dick, you wanted to come up and say something.
Yeah, I was, now, of course, a few other things have come that I'd like to comment on. But we were talking about the APIs and how, in the early days, Facebook and Twitter were platforms. I remember being at the first Facebook conference, and they were really wanting people to build on their platform. And Twitter was the same way, right? And it was an exciting time of APIs and how you could match up and build all kinds of stuff. And tons of innovation could be happening on top of that. And I think a lot of that was, people looked at the platform success of Microsoft with, DOS and then Windows, where, by making it easy for people to build things, all kinds of other innovation happened, but they saw that Microsoft made a lot of money. So their view was, we'll be the platform and we'll let other people fill in all the pieces. And as time went on, as it turned out, social networks didn't really work well like that. That wasn't the money. There was so much bad stuff that could happen with it because you're actually dealing with people as opposed to, writing software that ran on an operating system. And, all of the platform APIs, over time disappeared. And, really, they, shifted to some identity aspects. Twitter never really figured that part out. But Facebook figured it out with OpenID Connect that you weren't just connecting your account, but you could log in and that you could have people were using the API to have the user connect it and then call the API, as we all know, to figure out, well, which user is this? And, that then became the way around. How did you know who a user was if they connected their account? So APIs could be made, authorizing really a call to find out who was this user.
Don't you feel like, sorry, this is Brian again, that's the rug pull that everybody pulled on Web 2.0, which was, we're going to be a platform. We're going to be like Microsoft. We're going to, even like think of, Netscape with plugins and things like that. But in reality, Microsoft made their money by taking a VIG from every computer that was sold, right? And they always wanted to do that. That was their vision for, the information superhighway, which became the web or whatever. So in the end, like Facebook, Twitter, all these people rug pulled everybody because they're like, hey, that was part of their sort of get big fast strategy of like, okay, we'll have a 1,000 flowers bloom, but then in the end, the way we're going to make money is we're going to take the VIG, right? So like that's sort of, and I'm not trying to put words in anyone's mouth again, but like, isn't that sort of how Web 2.0 died? Was people promised this let 1,000 flowers bloom, but in the end, the way everybody made money was to shut it down and essentially recreate walled gardens.
Yeah, I would agree with that. They essentially just paved over all the grass. You couldn't grow anything anymore. Zynga took off. That was one of the companies that really was based on what you could do with Facebook. But over time, Facebook cut out more and more of those things, so you couldn't sort of ping your friends and But
it was also like an adversarial network or an adversarial effect, right? Like just like we're seeing all sorts of bad stuff happening in like the Web3 crypto land. I mean, throwing sheep at people, started to overwhelm the news feed, and that was like an endemic problem for Facebook.
Right. So I don't view it so much as a rug pull as opposed to, oh my, when people are building on something and interacting with people, right? It's not all goodness. There's a bunch of badness and abuse, and the users are sort of feeling abused and pulling away from the platform, and so they needed to cut the abuse.
So it wasn't just money, is what you're saying. It was also protecting the product, the experience.
Well, which of course is still money. It was all about the money.
Right.
Yeah. The model didn't really work when it was people interacting, in sharp contrast to Microsoft that, if you wanted to run software on a PC, you had to have Windows. And, that was a great moneymaker. And, you're just writing software on top of it, as opposed to the whole social aspect, which was super interesting and we were all excited about it. But human nature got in the way and abused it, right? We still see that with the bots in Twitter at this time.
Well, I think that brings us, to an important sort of like inflection point, which is, had we won, and of course that sort of requires us to unpack what it would have meant to have won and why we didn't win, what would things look like today?
Well, I think that what we need to do is how do we make the web more accountable? Right? I mean, there's massive amounts of money spent trying to detect bots and beat bots, right? All those aspects. And, I of course have an identity lens on everything. And so I view it's really an identity problem of like who is this, and having reputation, right? The aspect on the web of nobody knows you're a dog, but then of course nobody knows anything about you. What's the retribution in a digital world when you misbehave? In the physical world, if you're an asshole, people glare at you, they look at you, you feel bad, you stop doing that. But nobody thinks twice about telling somebody to fuck off or suck their cock on Twitter. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on these things.
It's Twitter, Nick. You can say it.
You're fine.
It's Twitter. Other people are doing it on Twitter. I'm just saying what's happening on Twitter. Exactly. There's no retribution, right? There's no consequences to the action. And so it's really kind of a reputation thing around that there's something bad happens to you in one place. And that now, everything's in a silo. So if you're bad and you get banned one place, well, you kind of turn it up, and it's hard for people to really know there's not really any binding on it. Yeah, go on, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the only place that doesn't happen is LinkedIn, because it's tied to kind of your professional persona, which is sort of that thing that limits people. But I will say the one thing that I wish Twitter or that Elon would do, and we all get our one wish, I guess, is lock everybody out of their account, and then everybody has to verify themselves just from day one, right? You can still have your account, but you got to verify it.
I mean, if they go private, you don't need to worry about users.
No, that's the white man's gambit. It's been called that, and I believe it honestly. You can't say more about that. Have verified people. You'll only get the people who feel safe.
Okay, I'm with you on that front. I was going to say something different.
I don't buy that. That's a bunch of crap. I think everybody, honestly, right now there's so many people on Twitter that hide behind anonymity when they don't need to. They're just cowardly. And I don't get the white man gambit, and that's fine. You can call it that. But I just think that's kind of ridiculous. I would much rather, I mean, if you look at LinkedIn, it's not verified, but people aren't doing all kinds of crazy stuff on there for, I guess, other reasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
New York, LA, San Francisco, this is your new real estate empire. The Upland Metaverse unlocks your dream of owning digital properties tied to real addresses across the United States. Upland is an open platform to explore, build, buy, and sell virtual properties. Basically, Upland is a game, but for real. Upland players rebuild the world starting with cities and neighborhoods on the properties that they own. They collect and trade properties, and they build enterprises to earn real-life value. Today, 3 million properties are already sold by over 250,000 property owners, and there's a whole world to purchase. Through play, Uplanders become true owners of NFT properties, holding fiat value. Buy it and flip it. That's right. These digital properties have resold for thousands of US dollars, and players have earned millions of dollars buying and flipping properties in Upland. Available on iOS, Android, and the web, Upland is the future of Web3, where virtual properties based on real-world addresses are part of your real estate portfolio. Ready to become a property tycoon? Sign up now and receive a 6,000 UPX starting bonus to begin your real estate empire in Upland. Head to discover.upland.me/techmeme for beginners to sign up. The link is also in the show notes. Constant Contact is a digital marketing platform that helps small businesses and nonprofits of all sizes build, grow, and succeed. With email marketing, contact management, industry-leading list growth tools, social media ads, and more, Constant Contact helps small businesses connect with customers, find new ones, and sell online, all from one easy-to-use platform. They've been trusted by millions of businesses to help improve their marketing. With a 97% deliverability rate, you can rest assured that your customers and potential customers are getting the right message at the right time. With a simple interface, Constant Contact's easy-to-use platform makes contact management easier than ever. Their list growth tools help you find a bigger audience fast. Lead generation landing pages, text to join, and social media ads are proven to grow your list and drive engagement with your brand. With thousands of integrations, you can sync Constant Contact's tools with the tools you're already using. Powerful automation tools help you send the right message to the right person at the right time, every time. To start your free digital marketing trial today, visit ConstantContact.com. That's ConstantContact.com.
I mean, I think to Terrell's point, like, at least I would certainly suggest that not everyone is equally safe, and not everyone actually has the same, privilege or ability to make mistakes in public as everyone else does. So unless we solve that problem, then I do think that it is still very much the enfranchised class's prerogative to behave in a certain way, because we haven't actually created a more egalitarian, inclusive society yet. Now, to your point, Scott, like, I think that you can hide behind anonymity and be, cowardly, and that's true. But that also doesn't mean that just because you can, that it's actually like safe for everyone in a way that actually enfranchises more people. Okay, let's get Rebel up here.
Yeah, what I was going to say is that, like, I don't think that verifying identities is going to work. There's in part because we saw Friendster lose to MySpace in part because of verified identities and using real names. We saw Google Plus fall apart over real names. I run a Twitter account called Top Photos, and it uses machine learning to identify police officers who don't have their IDs on them in uniform. And it only does police in uniform, and it's checked by a lawyer. But I sure as hell don't want my name connected to that Twitter account. But it's not abusing anyone. It's a free speech right thing. And there are lots of other cases where people aren't doing abusive or nefarious things where they don't want their identity shared. Queer people, trans people, anyone in a place of a repressive government. And if Twitter goes and verifies all the accounts, then they're going to be subject to legal orders to give, documentation about who all these people are. And in the US, it's not that big a deal, but in some countries, it's a tremendous deal. And I think that's one of the kind of almost Tumblr moments that he could do to try and, like, cause mass rebellion. And
wait, what does that mean? What do you mean by Tumblr moments?
Well, when Yahoo Verizon went and said, no longer can you do female presenting nipples, and made all these rules. And not only were they cutting back on the amount of porn that was on Tumblr and just sexy photos, but they said it in a way that was also tremendously sexist. And that's sort of when the Tumblr users said, we're going to rebel and, kill your platform by running away. And so Twitter, that could happen to Twitter as much as we all love it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're raising is actually a very interesting point, right? And I think one of the reasons why it's, for some people, so scary to have someone like Elon sort of, in the potential pole position is because he could make certain decisions that many other people would not, for fear of either incurring that kind of wrath or alienating, 45% of the user base or whatever it is. And so on the one hand, his ability to choose and decide something and then make something happen, like sending people to Mars or creating an electric car that actually, people want to buy. Like, those are really positive things that, really hadn't, I think, been done from a commercial sense, prior to his efforts. Or you want to like drill a hole from LA to like San Francisco. Cool, we'll do that. But you're absolutely right. Like, when it comes to these subtle social matters, there is a question as to how directly do you want to rip the social fabric that exists versus sort of, massage it out or smooth it into sort of a new order that takes place over time. And is I mean, if you think about the way that a lot of Supreme Court decisions happen, they take generations because they are so meaningful and impactful. Now, maybe that's too slow, but if you go too fast, then there's a whole set of people who are not actually brought along for those changes, and it creates huge rifts in society and culture. Now, I want to bring up Ross, because Ross is also another sleeper speaker who came up. We've actually had Ross on the show before when he launched the Zoom app platform. Folks might remember that. But Ross has also been around for quite a while in the whole sort of internet world. And is that a dog snoring?
I had a dog barking.
I don't know what I was hearing. Anyway, I'm hearing things now. Anyways, and funny enough, one little anecdote here. Back in 2005, when I was organizing Barcamp, which was this event that then, I just posted some photos that John took of Social Web Camp, or Social Web Foo, whatever it was, Social Foo Camp. We organized Barcamp in Ross's original space in Palo Alto. And so that's how far back we go. Anyways, Ross, I'm sure you've been waiting to say something for a while. Introduce yourself and please chime in.
I was just walking a dog and wanted to listen into like people on my old blog roll, right? But I was trying to think about, if I was some poor lost soul trying to build on like Web3, which is a really bad idea that will fail in every conceivable way, like, is there some wisdom from the beginning of the Web 2.0 stuff? And from the conversation, like I reflect back on O'Reilly eTech back in 2003, where a group of people got together and started to create the Social Software Alliance that was looking at RSS with its greatness and forthcomings and started to work on protocols on Atom as a standard.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was great because the approach was at the energy at the moment was, standards bodies are going to be too slow. Just implement, get a group of people to implement is truth, right? And get agreement around that implementation. And you see a lot of that energy, right? But if I was to say, like, where was the moment where we lost on Web 2.0 when you're talking at this layer versus, the centralized thing that it became? It really was like, imagine this, like back then you had movable type, you had amazing blog platforms, right? Where you had people's, yes, identity, but expression of identity. And the thing that strung it together was RSS and Atom as a way to be able to follow the conversation, right? And maybe
so decentralized syndication formats.
Mm-hmm. And in a weird way, what happened was everybody kind of stayed within their boundaries. Like if I'm making blog software, my friend is making RSS news readers, I'm not going to encroach in that, right? So you had, like within movable type, you had backtracks. So you could see replies to your blog posts in a decentralized way. But nobody ever like realized what would be the whole product concept for a truly decentralized way of being able to have all these conversations and content sharing. And then it still would need another mechanism of discovery. But even like with what was it, Dave Weiner's thing, I forget the name of the blog software.
Weblogs?
Weblogs. You still had like what
Frontier.
Yes, Frontier, which was where I started on it. You still had like this one page that was like whose blogs were the most popular, right? Was the very first inkling of like a centralized discovery mechanism, right? It didn't take that much at that time before the more centralized versions of all of this occurred. And my little hypothesis is nobody realized like the whole product concept to let me own a site, own my identity, be able to follow all of the conversations and still discover things and people outside of that, the way that I'd just be following things, right? And, I still, again, like on the Web3 thing, right? What do we have? There's zero adoption besides speculation that with one exception, which is like the Brave browser, which has like 50 million people using it because they don't want ads, right? But there's no fucking use case and there's no orientation towards adoption. And you can create all the protocols you want. And the truth of implementation is not that you've implemented it in code, but people actually fucking use it, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's a lesson in all that or if I'm helping in the conversation, but
well, I think actually what you're saying is really useful, and part of what I'm also trying to get at, which is this question, of had we been successful, had we somehow decentralized the social web, and Twitter and Facebook, let's say, just as an example, were somehow more interoperable, where you could be a Facebook user, I could be a Twitter user, and we could actually subscribe to each other and interact with each other's content, much like you can do with Mastodon, or you can do on Planetary Social, which is, of course, Rabble's thing. I want to bring DeWitt into this because I think DeWitt had actually a very sort of supportive point around that, specifically as it relates to, I guess, media and consumption and entertainment and what happens on these enabling technologies that goes way beyond what we are sort of focusing on, which is the tech and the technologies and the formats and all this bullshit that no one cares about. DeWitt, tell us what's wrong.
I thanks. And I just want to amplify, I think, a point that Ross is making. And it's a point that, is near and dear to all of us, which is we have some really smart people on this call, and we've been doing this for decades now. We've built the protocols. We've standardized those protocols. And I don't think there was a technology problem. In fact, you could look at the technology that Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and the successful companies use. It was inferior to our open standardized alternatives. That was never the problem. And there is,
I know our Betamax was amazing. What the hell, guys?
Exactly. So it's we could look at that and we're like, oh yeah, maybe we didn't write the right things. But I don't think that was what happened.
But let me jump in real quick. Hasn't that always been the original sin, where it's in the same way that the GUI was a simpler layer that overtopped the command line that made it, I don't have to know anything, right? And in the same way, the web is still open, right? It's just that it's too complicated for people to spin up even their own WordPress site and things like that. So all that these platforms did was make that, again, sort of dead simple like the GUI did. Is that always what we come back to, even when we're talking about Web3? Because friggin' Web3 is still complicated as shit, and somebody's going to come around at some point and maybe put a GUI on top of that and make it simple for my mom to do, in theory. Is that all it is? Is it just abstracting away all of the complication? Is that the thing that we constantly run into with this idea of openness?
I mean, it does seem like, the tension, the fundamental tension, and I know that the Blue Sky team is working on this, and so Rabble, I'll have you speak to that in a second, is how do you keep something open and supporting freedom and lots of choice and the ability to take your data with you and go someplace else and still retain all the nuance and the subtlety that's captured in the metadata, that the viewer or the platform itself knows how to interpret and make sense of. And as you said, Brian, make it easy and available to, your mom or to anybody else who, or your dad or whatever, anybody else who wants to use these things and actually doesn't really want the experience of the technology. The taste of the technology in their mouth is what makes them not want to use it. And so things that obscure the technology or make it more pleasurable or exciting, I think TikTok is such a, good example of that, where it's you just open the app and you just flick with your thumb and it's so accessible to so many people and it starts to learn you and gives you a delightful experience. You can give a shit about where that, content comes from. Anyways, so that tension is important. Dick has been waiting to come up for a second. So come on up and say something.
Yeah, I'm just going to build off of that and then go into my other comment.
Perfect.
Having worked on a number of standards, it's hard to get everybody aligned and agree. There's a bunch of different interests, etc. But if you're a single entity, right, you can just decide what you want to do, put it together, iterate, evolve, get feedback. You move really fast. You can build something that works really well. And, that's been proven time and time and again. And I think really the decision whether there's a standard on doing it is really, do you need interop for there to unlock the value? Or can you just unlock the value by doing it well?
Yeah.
And, so a number of these things like Facebook and Twitter and TikTok, right? They unlock the value by doing it well. Interop between different things doesn't deliver the value. Iterating and doing it really well delivers the value.
Actually, so as you're saying that, I'm just sort of reminded, that Apple really was never really part of our conversations, to the best of my recollection. And what I found so interesting, and what I think is happening, and I'm bringing this up because you raised the point about interoperability. And I think there's a difference between interoperability and decentralized interoperability. Because Apple actually, especially with sign in with Apple, is quite interoperable, or pay with Apple and Apple ID. They are building these standards and technologies, and I'm sure actually you probably know a lot more about this than I do, into the fabric of the web, but they're also building it into the operating system. And so they are not willing to compromise on the user experience of being able to authenticate with your face or authenticate with your thumb, things that we talked about years and years ago, but never got to implementation to the level that Apple has. And Apple has enabled billions of users to take advantage of amazing digital identity experiences within their very closed down, walled, garden. So the fact that they were, I guess, focused on that experience and then layered on interop and decentralization of some sort after they got the experience right, maybe there's a lesson in that. And to this point about Web3, you've got to start with amazing financialized, I guess, transactions, and then layer in, well, it's really hard to do, but then layer in the cryptography or the decentralization or the Web3 rails, because you can't just start with the format or the technology and presume that anyone's going to care unless you're doing things that are either imperiled by the current system or, illegal or, where you just want more control, from the current gatekeepers because you want to become the next gatekeeper yourself.
But I'm sorry to butt in. It's not, user experience is part of it, right? It's a huge part of it, but it's about distribution is my point, right? You can't, none of these wonderful protocols are going to get anywhere. They're not getting, because the core product fitness and its user experience is shit. It's not really solving real problems for people or creating delightful experiences enough. And the distribution mechanism is hampered.
Yeah. Yeah. Rebel, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few points. As we were talking about, what the Web 2.0 projects or those early open projects would look like if they hadn't been taken over, the answer is podcasting. Apple came in, embraced the standard, gave people a platform, never took it over, never built that much on top of it, but was dominant enough to prevent anyone else, ironically enough, say Audio, to dominate that, and podcasting has stayed open. This open protocol versus centralization thing. Moxie, who created Signal, gave a talk a couple of years ago where he said he doesn't believe in decentralization or interoperable protocols because you can't A/B test them and you can't optimize, and the innovation is slower. And so, that might be that, optimizing that user experience and sort of polishing off all those edges is harder on these protocols and these open systems, and that's why we lose. But I don't know. But I really think that podcasting is the one example that came out of that era that didn't get dominated. Spotify is trying now, but it's like a decade later and not succeeding.
Yeah, I mean, their reports are actually, or their results, their quarterly results were actually not so bad. I would say email is also one of those decentralized technologies that sits in the background and is still, hugely, powerful, popular, and all over the place. The messaging space, I think, is a really interesting one to bring up, especially, given, again, Rebel, what you're working on, and the fact that Twitter early on, thanks to the work of Blaine and you and other folks, was working on a decentralized protocol, which is XMPP. So,
yeah, we tried to federate it with XMPP and had prototypes running.
Yeah, and then what happened?
Just to echo in on the email comment, right? We think it's open and decentralized, but it isn't, because once again, we had all this bad human behavior of spamming and phishing.
Yeah.
And so unless you're one of the big 7 or 8 providers, it's really hard to send mail.
It's better than a duopoly, though, right?
I'm not arguing about it, but it's not it's wildly.
Well, but I think it raises a good point, which is, what is a decentralized future that we actually want, right? So if Blue Sky were to succeed, is it that we've had 1,000, flowers bloom, and we're looking at sort of like the Mastodon, universe where there's just tons of servers, or maybe, Discord is obviously centralized, but it has the concept of servers as kind of their individual nodes in its own little network. Or is it that we have 8, different providers? And that actually is much better because there's not the concentration of power that there is in, let's say Facebook.
Joseph, I think that's what it is. When you have a monopoly, right, that it stifles innovation. You look at what AT&T did to telecom, right, and breaking it up opened everything wide open. And so the concern is always if there's one party that has it, they just become rent-seeking, very little interest in innovating. Where if you have a marketplace where there's a number of players, they're innovating because they're competing against each other. And, you get a lot of innovation. There's not rent seeking. There's not someone just pulling out the control. But I'm going to turn it over to Joseph.
No, Dick, I'm just picking up exactly where you left off, which is the key difference is that you reduce the switching costs, which is what enables the innovation, because, social networks in particular have this very high network effect. And so it's not enough to just get one person to switch. You have to get their friends, and then you have to get those people's friends and those people's friends, right? And so you do see these moments, even though Google Plus wasn't successful, Facebook was certainly worried about it while we were building it. And we had a lot of better features on circles and photos and other things that they then started rapidly copying. And so they ended up improving their product pretty significantly because for a moment they felt there was a real competitive threat. And then when that went away, that stuff stopped getting better at nearly the same rate. And you see that across lots of different industries, right? So that's why we know that actual threat of real competition is what drives innovation. That's the whole capitalist approach. And so, it's not that ultimately everyone will be running their own servers. They may actually only be a handful of players that most people are on, but it's the ability for something to start small. And if it's interesting, people can actually move to it and it can, rise up and become a thing that people use. Nobody used Gmail when it first came out, but because of the way email worked, people could try it out, and if they liked it, they could move over, and that there was no sort of permission structure there, right? And now maybe everyone uses Gmail, but something else could still come along and conceivably become a new email client of choice. And we have such lack of imagination. People think, how much different could these social services be? But they could be extremely different. They could be different in terms of the types of content that gets shared, the way it gets discovered and ranked and filtered, the way conversations happen. There's all kinds of opportunity there, and we just won't see it if there isn't this ability to not have to recreate the entire network from the bottom up. Even, now with John in this new creator economy space, and we're not trying to replace social networks, but when creators and fans want to build a deeper relationship, your mentions is just kind of a cesspool, right? And your inbox gets overwhelmed and you get 50,000 comments and you can't sort through them. There's tons of opportunity for innovation just in that niche alone in terms of how do I help filter out the noise and have a longer term relationship and figure out who my true fans are, what they're interested in. That's just one example where APIs are key to innovation. And, what APIs do exist thanks to all this work we did in the early days actually has allowed us to build a lot of cool stuff already. Facebook actually is one of the most open when it comes to APIs. TikTok doesn't have any APIs, for example. So I think what we've seen is enough to drive a lot of innovation, but there's still so much more that could be had. And I think that's why I continue to be an optimist, because we've seen this movie before. And when it does work, there's all kinds of great things that happen. You don't have to be able to predict the future. You just have to know what the conditions are to sort of let that Darwinian process unfold.
Well, and, to add to that, I do think obviously like my stupid contribution to this conversation in some way was the hashtag. And it was predicated on the idea of offering kind of generative seedlings out to the internet or to the web to allow people to build upon them. Whether that's a format or a protocol or a standard or a set of libraries that implement some of these ideas and allow other people to sort of carry the water forward even further than you were able to do because you solved something or you figured something out or you figured a pattern that everyone was eventually going to have. DeWitt spoke to it earlier where a number of larger, companies, namely, Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, all realized that they were solving the same problem, and their marginal competitive advantage for having their own bespoke authorization protocol actually wasn't in their own interest. In fact, it was in the industry's interest and in security interest to harmonize and standardize on how to solve that one problem to move the web forward. Like it's been done many, many times on the internet. The internet is made of a series of tubes which are standardized so that you can fit them together to create the plumbing of a great house. That's a metaphor that I probably should just never use again. But nonetheless, I think it's worthwhile to think about how some of those concepts and behaviors and values are worth reiterating in this moment when a lot of people in the Web3 world are kind of in this scattershot brain space where there is economic incentives and speculation, and that's driving why they're building and getting into the space. And there's also those who are interested in actually the formats and the technologies and solving some of the technical things that we were unable to solve because we didn't have this decentralized supercomputer, which is the blockchain. So actually, I want to bring that up. Like one of the things that I want this group specifically to sort of think about is if you had Elon Musk's ear and he's about to buy Twitter and take it private, and all the things that we've talked about in terms of decentralization and innovation and letting 1,000 flowers bloom, like the guy could just like blow all of his money on this like one shot to save humanity, like he's trying to do with taking us to Mars, with blowing up the social web. What's one or two things that you would have him do right now, or perhaps in the next 2 months, if you could ask him to do one thing? And I'm going to start actually with John because we haven't heard from him in a hot minute.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I don't know if he'll actually pull it off, but if he does, I would love to see a clean sweep, eliminating all of the bots.
And so how might you go about doing that? Because I do know that Twitter is working on professional accounts as well as labeling automated accounts. So if you were to imagine, let's say there's just like an EMP in the Matrix that wipes out all the squiddies and they just like fall to the floor and they die. And then slowly there's an application process for applying to run a bot on Twitter. First of all, would you allow that? And secondly, what might that look like?
Yeah, and I would say it's somewhat ironic, if not hypocritical, of me to say this, given that I've spent the last few years helping create some of the most interesting bots to do conversational AI on Facebook Messenger. So I think there are use cases where automated engagement is actually useful for all parties, especially if it's done in a way that's transparent. But I also have long believed that Twitter, with its ad-supported model, has happily turned a blind eye to easily detectable bot accounts that are convenient for them in terms of presenting a reachable audience to brands. But which would be fairly simple to.
Yeah, I will say that there, whether it's the crypto bots or just other, very obvious and obnoxious, like I don't know if it's just like an arms race, and the pace at which these things are created is so fast. And in the early days, they look like new users, and so it's really hard to tell them apart. Or if, as you say, like Twitter actively is turning a blind eye to some of them for some reason. I mean, the latest one has been that verified accounts seem to be either getting hacked or something. And they start spewing, this like shilling stuff. And how is it that the verification system has been so corrupted to enable bots to behave like that? Like that is fundamental root rot from the core.
Yeah, and I also think like they never ever figured out what they were really doing with verification. So I mean,
and they tried to restart that program many times.
Yeah, but I don't think Elon Musk knows what he's in for.
I think a lot of people agree with that. But that's why we have this panel here, so we can send this podcast and then I'll have some ideas.
But come on, they said that about the electric car. They said that about going to space. And,
which were technically
here's the other thing that drives me crazy about Twitter is from the beginning of Twitter, I don't know how many people were complaining about how hard Twitter was. I mean, I can remember, seeing folks like, if Blaine were on this, I'd say it too. He was up on stage talking about, Twitter and scaling Twitter and while it's down and we're sitting in the audience going, hey, Blaine, you should probably get off stage and go fix it. But I feel like every problem on Twitter has always been, oh, it's so hard you don't understand. But at the end of the day, I never felt like there was really, really strong leadership there either. Because let's remember that, and, I don't want to like rewrite history or tell it wrong, but there was a lot of infighting and I don't feel like there was strong leadership. And, Jack was there, but was also, running a whole other company for a good chunk of that thing. So I don't know. I mean, I'm excited. I'm rooting for Elon. And what do I want to do? I'd get rid of the bots and verify people, truly verify people. That's what I would wish for. Anyway.
Well, I mean, given that a number of us have been on the OpenID Foundation and have worked on identity standards, Scott, if you had to give him a specific directive, what form of identity verification would you recommend that he pursue?
But that's like way above my pay grade. Okay. I mean, all I know is that there's got to be something better than what they're doing. And I think to Rabble's point that he mentioned in the back channel, that bots are okay, but bots pretending to be people are not okay. And I think that's an important distinction. And I think that's going back to the sort of root rob that you talk about is so critical. Now, how do you verify that? I mean, look. How do you make autonomous cars go? Okay, well, I can't tell you, but there are a lot of really smart people who can work on that problem.
Yeah. So we have another sleeper cell who's come into the conversation, who many of us on the stage know and are quite familiar with. Kevin Marks, do you want to quickly introduce yourself? Tell us what you were doing back in the 2007, 2008 time period, and then please join the conversation.
All around the world, tech companies are innovating and driving returns for investors. Our crowd analyzes companies across the global private market, selecting those with the greatest growth potential, then bringing them to you. From personalized medicine to cybersecurity to open source intelligence, a multi-billion-dollar and growing market. Our crowd is identifying innovators so you can invest when growth potential is greatest early on. Our crowd's accredited investors have already invested over $1 billion in growing tech companies. 21 of the portfolio companies are now unicorns. And now you can invest in Ciabra, whose AI-powered SaaS platform analyzes billions of online conversations to help companies gain authentic consumer insights while fighting disinformation in real time. Ciabra is trusted by global media giants, consumer brands, and high-level government agencies. Invest today at our crowd. Invest in Ciabra at OURCROWD.com/ride. You can join our crowd for free at OURCROWD.com/ride. Join the fastest growing venture capital investment community at ourcrowd.com/ride.
There are all different sizes of businesses. Big business, small business, that awkward growing phase business, the running this thing from my garage business, and the OMG we can't hire fast enough business. Wherever you are in your business journey, HubSpot's powerful but easy-to-use CRM platform grows with you. It lets all of your teams work together seamlessly, whether that's just you and your roommate or colleagues across multiple time zones. Grow better with HubSpot by connecting your people, your customers, and your business. Learn more at HubSpot.com.
Hi there. I'm not sure if the mic's working because my headset just switched off. But
good.
Okay. Well, back then we were all trying to build distributed social networks out of the different systems that we had then. I'd been working at Techmeme, indexing blogs and so on. And 2007, I joined Google.
What Techmeme was for those of us who weren't born.
Well, back in the day. Basically, Techmeme was app replies for the web. What we did was we indexed blogs and told you when one linked to another. We were hooked into the blogging system so that we got updates within a few seconds of the blogs being posted. We would index them then, and then we'd ping the people who that post had linked to. So effectively, we were constructing app replies for the web across different blogging systems. And we just 2007, I left February 2007, and we just started crawling Twitter at that point. But then shortly after that, Techmeme sort of scaled back the crawling by about 2 orders of magnitude and stopped crawling everything. But at that point, the idea was we'll crawl everything on the web and connect everyone up. And part of that effort was also with Turntech there and a bunch of people outside. We worked on microformats as a way of marking up the web to say, this is what the meaning of the web is, and also this is how things are connected together.
Yeah, it's very important that I think people understand that effort and that initiative. So there were 2 parts of the microformats initiative. One was to kind of use the scientific method and to go and to explore and to document what already existed. how were people marking up web pages? What were the types of objects that you'd find in a web page, like a recipe, for example, that you found in lots of blogs? And could you identify the specific metadata or actual data in the page and add it to the way in which you created your HTML so that you could syndicate new types of content or experiences beyond just blog posts themselves? You could go much deeper and richer. Okay, continue.
Right, that was initially like Technology had been pulling feeds and using what was around in RSS adding, and then we started calling web pages as well because the feeds were sort of truncated versions of the posts. And then the follow-up from that was to try and define these structures and then define common ways of marking them up so we could pull those and get these rich data out, as you say, get recipes out and things like that, but get personal profiles, the actual structure of the post. Tags was a big one, which we did by linking with rel equals tag. And also the other part was the XFN project, which was
XFN.
Putting a bunch of rel values on the links to say this link is actually
so this was like I want to make a point. The social graph back then was a type of graph structure. The graph structure or the graph itself, the nodes, like were websites or web pages. Those web pages represented people. And so I could link to you, Kevin, and say rel equals friend. And if you linked back to my page and said rel equals friend, that was a bi-directional link that added an edge to that graph. And you could start to build that. That was the whole vision for the decentralized web, was you had these open public nodes that represented people and they were cross-linking to each other. And that was how we were going to build the federated social web.
And then the other identity part of that was you could link with rel equals me to say this profile is also my profile.
Equivalencies. Yeah. The whole link in bio thing, like Claim ID was a rel me provider.
Yes. But the other thing is that all the sites sort of embraced this and built that in as well. The other part of that was that Twitter did have all these markup on it because the engineers were like, yeah, we can have that. And Facebook had it and so on. And then the iteration of that was then we started working on sort of trying to converge those a bit more. And that was where we got into portable contacts with Joe and activity streams, which was a sort of large group of us that you were very involved with as well, which was trying to structure this stuff up.
Yep.
And then the other piece of that was that at Google, Brad Fitzpatrick built the crawler that would construct basically an API that crawled all these rel me links and rel friend links and so on, and would feed that back for you. It sort of hooked into the Google crawler to do that, which was a sort of a step beyond what we've done at Technorati because it was doing a lot more of the web. So there was a lot of effort in parallel where we were all sort of pulling in the same direction.
So Rebel just brought this up in our back channel. He sort of pointed out how activity streams, which was our effort to add more kind of information, more hints to an Atom feed so that you could specify the actor and the verb and the object. So you could go beyond just blog posts. You could say, Chris posted a photo or things like that. And then you could start to syndicate news feeds. That was the whole premise behind it. Actually gave us ActivityPub. And ActivityPub now is part of Mastodon. So the things that we did start and were worked on, way back in the day are still present and are still among us. And I think that's why it's so important for this group to be able to, think about what worked, what didn't work. Why were we too early, frankly? And what lessons do we have to bring to what's going on now? Because the world has changed, things around us has changed, but also there's about to be a big change, I think, to the Twitter platform specifically. All right. So we got to wrap soon. Dick, let's get you up here and then maybe we'll do like a lightning round. I'll have to think about a question. Anyways, Dick, go for it.
Well, I was going to go into your question around what should Elon do?
Yes, please keep going on that. That's the one.
So verification is available now, right? They've opened it up again, but you got to meet some magic criteria that's not really clear what it is. I went and tried to verify my account, and I guess I'm just not special enough. So one of the things that I would say is open up verification and building on the rel equals me, right? We're not out there having to edit all the different links. It's fairly straightforward. You can link your LinkedIn account and your Twitter account, your Facebook account. Twitter could allow you to link a bunch of other accounts as part of that whole verification that these are all me. for other people to know that, this is really who, this is Dick in all these different places, along building upon the same rel.me technology. The other thing that is... What's that?
Mastodon already supports that. That is built into Mastodon now as well.
Sure, but they don't have as many users. But it's a
distribution.
Love that they have that. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that it's confirmation of that being valuable. But they also need to open up the namespace. There's all these handles that have been squatted on and stuff like that. I think they need to clean that up, because there's all these dead accounts that could be more useful and have a richer experience. That's sort of orthogonal to these other parts. And I also think they should lead the way on exporting, reputation signals, right? That if you have been a good participant and haven't been banned or done anything bad on Twitter, that's something that you can take out of Twitter and bring to other sites.
Portable reputation never seemed to take off, though, for some reason, right?
Which part?
Portable reputation. I mean, like if people go back and look at your 2006 talk on identity, your iconic talk, you talked a lot about the different facets of identity and about credentials. And so you could know something like an attribute about a person, or you could know who they are specifically, unto themselves. And reputation, or your behavior over time, your reputability, never became something that was portable. And that would have been like an amazing opportunity, I would think.
Yeah, well, and I think there's, in my work with Flow, I've been talking to a number of players that love this idea, particularly in some of the dynamic markets where anybody signing up for Airbnb is they have a cold start, right? They're not able to bring any reputation, right? And that's a big challenge on how do you deal with abuse. And so myself, I think if we can have portable reputation of some kind, we can start to minimize some of the abuse.
Are you working on that with Hello? And are you doing that with NFTs if you are?
Yes and no.
Okay.
NFTs, I think, are going to evolve a bit. And so, if you squint and think about where might the world be in 3 years, you might be calling your reputation an NFT. Potentially that's the same thing. The other point that I want to make out is people are saying, like, well, we need to add verification. There's a bunch of that. I do think we need to open up the verification because it helps prevent, impersonation, identity theft, and things like that. But verification clearly doesn't, stop
prevent bad actors.
Right?
Yeah,
Trump. You
can still be an asshole and get verified.
Right? That was a verified account, and
right.
We can all judge as to what kind of actor that was.
Yeah. Okay, so I figured out the lightning round. Actually, Ryan figured out the lightning round. We're going to wrap this up. Basically, your thoughts: will Twitter be better or worse in 2 years? And I don't want a long answer, just yes or no. All right, you guys ready? Okay, you guys are ready. Here we go. I'm going to go in the order that I see here.
That's not a yes/no question.
You have to choose, Scott. You have to make a prediction. I'm starting with you. Yes or no? Twitter is better or worse?
It'll be better.
Okay, great. John?
Better.
Great. Dick?
Much better.
Amazing. DeWitt?
Better.
Joseph?
I think it'll be better. I'm an optimist, though.
Yeah, I know you are. So I expected that. Rabble?
I mean, if I have to choose one, better, honestly.
Okay. Ross?
I'm an optimist, but I'd say worse.
Okay, great. You're also a contrarian. Kevin?
I'd say worse if extrapolating from the way it's been going.
Okay. Ryan?
I was going to say I'm shocked that everybody said better. I don't know that I expected everyone to say worse, but I thought it would be more mixed, and I think worse.
Okay. Well, I am hoping that it's going to be better, and so I choose to believe that it will be better. And I think this group is a group of optimists, and I think we are people who built a lot of the foundations of the social web because we are optimists and because we are not so pessimistic about humanity and how shitty it often is. And that's a whole different, ball game and different Twitter space that we're not going to get into now. So thank you everyone for being here, for hanging out with us. Guys, thanks for getting back together, the old Social Web TV gang. We will probably have you on for other conversations in the future. This was amazing. Love you all. And thanks so much for showing up.
This will be on the Techmeme Ride Home podcast feed on Saturday. And I also want to thank all of you for coming on and for so long, almost 2 hours. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, you need to get Monica next time as well.
Okay, totally. All right, guys.
It's been a lot of fun, guys.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Brian.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye, guys.